I'm from Kansas, so I'm out here just exploring Dade County.
Yeah.
You know, what's significant about Dade County? Is there anything about the county that's cool to see?
There's just a lot of really good people here.
Yeah.
A lot of hard-working people.
Welcome to Dade County, Missouri, and we're gonna spend some time exploring all around this county. And right now we're starting in the middle of the county. This is Greenfield, and it is the county seat. And I have previously done a video about Greenfield, Missouri, and so if you're curious about this town, you might want to check that out first. You know, Missouri gained statehood in 1821. But this did not become a county until 1841. It was kind of bits and pieces of other counties, and the boundaries and the borders were a little bit different for a few years until into the 1840s, where they kind of established what it is today. Pretty fascinating area. There's about 6 incorporated towns, and then there are lots and lots of ghost towns. We're leaving Greenfield, which is kind of right in the middle of the county, and heading to South Greenfield. That'll be our first stop on this video. The first settlers to this county were in the early 1820s. It was a guy named John Crisp, and he was in this county 20 years before it was actually a county. And a more well-known name in the 1830s came here, a guy by the name of Nathaniel Boone, and he was the son of Daniel Boone. And he actually, he was in Dade County for a while. Then he basically set up his homestead near Ash Grove, which is just east of Dade County, and he lived there until his death in 1856. The county was named after Francis Langhorne Dade, who was a major in the Second Seminole War of 1835. It was very attractive to a lot of people because of the kind of fertile area for vegetation. It had timber, it had water. Zinc was discovered here in 1874, just a little bit north of Greenfield. Obviously that brought a lot of people as well. And then coal, it became a coal mining area. So a lot of resources in Dade County, and probably led to that increase in population where it went up to nearly 20,000 people. And when that stuff becomes less significant, the jobs move away, and that's like a lot of smaller counties in population. That same thing happened here. South Greenfield obviously is south of Greenfield, a couple miles, and it was originally called Watkins from 1881 to 1891, and the 1891 changed its name to South Greenfield. When the railroad came to Greenfield, they actually had I guess you could call a little extension that came down here that helped this town grow. It had over 400 people in 1890, and that was kind of its peak, and then it has gone downhill, and just in population it's about a little over 100 now. Interesting, they have a little circle, kind of like, I guess say a town square, but there's not much left. A couple other older buildings that are cool to see, but it's definitely a town that if you weren't paying attention you would miss it trying to find it. In fact, I did miss it the first time I drove past the road and had to turn around and come back. here where Pennsboro, it's an unincorporated community called Pennsboro. There's a church and a cemetery. There is some history of maybe a more significant area. They had a post office from the 1890s into the 1930s. The railroad actually stopped here, and then that line was abandoned. The depot was actually taken down to Mount Vernon, which is a town a few miles south of here, and their depot had burned down, and so when they didn't need the one here anymore in Pennsboro, it was headed down the road. It was named after William Penn, but not the famous William Penn that Pennsylvania was named after. There was another William Penn who was an early settler of Dade County, and this is what Pennsboro was named after. I think there's supposed to be a school. It was one of the original consolidated schools in Missouri, and I'd read that as recent as a few years ago, the school was still being used as a community center. I've not been able to find it. I've only found a couple of, maybe a place where there was a gas station in where it says Pennsboro, but I haven't found where the school is. Maybe I haven't looked in the right place. I've kind of been looking. One of these things when you think there's something there and you don't find it, it's frustrating, and you keep looking and looking, and maybe I'm just not looking in the right place. In this general vicinity, I think was a town called Dadeville. Now we're going to go to another Dadeville in a little bit that's still a town today, but there was an earlier Dadeville that didn't last very long. It was in the 1840s, and I found an old map, and it said it's about around here, and then it was here for a short period of time and then abandoned and then popped up again in the 1850s, and like I said, a little more east, maybe north and east of here, and we'll be there in a little bit. So I was unsuccessful looking for Pennsboro School, but was successful in finding the Turnback Mill, also known as Dilday Mill. This is Turnback Creek, and the mill that still has some remnants here was built in 1867. There was actually a mill in the 1840s built here, and that's kind of where the town of Turnback initially grew, and had a post office from the 1850s until after early in the 1900s, and about 35 people, small community, but they did have the mill, and so that probably helped have some jobs and have this place have a little bit of a life. It was hard to find the mill. I mean, it was on the map accurately, but I went down Old Mill Lane or Mill Lane, and it went to a private property, and so I thought, man, I'm not going to be able to get a glimpse of this. And then got back out on the main road, and I look over to the, out the window, and there it is, and find a little side dirt path and walk on down to see the mill. It's really beautiful down here on Turnback Creek, and I can see why they started a little settlement here. I couldn't find much info about the town of Pilgrim, except for that there was a post office from 1860s until a little after 1900. And when I got here, there's like one home, maybe a cemetery north of here. Haven't been there yet, but I'll go there here at the end. And then the railroad. So obviously it's a railroad town, and it says South Pilgrim on where the railroad is here. So it says Pilgrim on the map, it says South Pilgrim here. I'm assuming obviously this built up around the railroad, but there's not much left of it anymore down some very back roads here of Dade County. And just a half a mile up the real back road from Pilgrim is this place called Friend Cemetery. And I kind of wondered if it was maybe a group of friends decided to have a cemetery, but actually there's a friend, John Friend, and his wife. So I'm assuming it was named after their family, and maybe then it became the local community cemetery because there's several others. Most of them are pretty old. There's not a lot of new headstones here. So pretty neat little cemetery, Friend Cemetery. Made our way over to Everton, Missouri. And Everton is a town, about 300 or so people, and was, twice as big or more when it originally was going early in the early 1900s, late 1800s. There's quite a bit to see up in the town. I'm actually in a park that's just south of town, but there's some cool old buildings, a little interesting downtown, and then there's a school. There's a saddle club, which is basically looks like a rodeo area, and so some things to see here in Everton. This is a very interesting spot. This is the city park, which is just south of town across the railroad tracks. And behind me, this is called the William Penn Cabin, and we were talking about William Penn earlier. And so this is the William Penn Cabin, and it was also the first ever courthouse in Dade County, and it's has 1837 on it. So don't know if that meant that that's when it was a courthouse, or if that's when it was built, or a cabin, William Penn's cabin, or all the above. So pretty neat little thing to check out here in Everton. Just outside of Everton, I found Sinking Creek Church and Cemetery, and it says it was established in the 1840s. It's interesting because Everton wasn't started till 1881, but there was a town, or at least a post office, called Rock Prairie in this general vicinity from in the 1840s till 1881. And so maybe this area was known as Rock Prairie, and the church was here and the cemetery, and then it became kind of edge of Everton because it's a big cemetery. There's obviously people that come here now, and there's graves that are more recent. It's kind of a lot of these towns in Dade County were something else, and then were gone, and then something else started right near the same place. And a lot of it had to do with the Civil War times, but kind of cool that here's a church that obviously wasn't built in 1842, but was started here in this area, and I'm assuming if we walk around we could probably find some old headstones from that era. Off into the distance, you probably can't hear it anymore, but the train just passed through where I believe Emmet used to be. Emmet was a town that was basically started on a railroad in the 1880s when it came through here. Had a post office for about 20 years, and was named after the son of the original site owner. I wasn't expecting much when I got to Hulston, but it has definitely exceeded those expectations. I'm inside a cabin walking through, and it's very rustic, very authentic. Oh, I got some wasps running around me there. But yeah, it's right here. It's right here next to the mill, the historic Hulston Mill. And this was a town, it only had a post office for about 10 years in the late 1890s, early 1900s. And I don't know much about this cabin. It's now a park, and you can camp here and probably do some hiking. And it's very beautiful, but very out of the way. Well, that was an interesting bridge to come up on. Didn't know it would be looking like that. Old bridge, one-lane dirt road over a pretty significant body of water there. There's another post office somewhere that was around here called Engelman's Mill. I don't think there's any roads or any sign of it anymore. So there's definitely a lot of mills in Dade County back in the day. Earlier we had gone to an original Dadeville, and now this is the second iteration of Dadeville, and this one is still surviving, unlike the first one. Here, in this location, actually from 1853 to 1858, it was called Melville, and in 1858 they changed it to Dadeville, and maybe once again hoping that that name would bring more significance in the county. It did for a while. You know, it was almost 500 people around the year 1900, and then went down in the 200s. Actually went down into the mid 100s, and then recovered and has been in the, you know, low to mid 200s for quite a while. So it kind of stabilized there. So that's good news that it's not continuing to go down. But yeah, it's got a few older buildings right in the downtown area. There is a middle school here, and got a good water tower behind me. It's interesting that the Dadeville Cemetery was on Melville Street, which was the original name of this town. I've driven up the little dirt road to the cemetery for Corry because there's really nothing left of what the town of Corry was. I drove over to where the dot on the map was, and there was a slab of concrete. And so maybe that was something. And you know, there was a house or two and some old cars and trucks. So, but the cemetery is a little overgrown, but has some new flowers on it, and so it looks like it's still fairly active. So there's a little bit of community left here. Corry was actually named after the daughter of an early settler. Her name was Cora, C-O-R-A, and they submitted that to the post office, and somehow there was a clerical error. It was spelled Corry, C-O-R-R-Y. I don't know how you get that from C-O-R-A, and that had to have been a bummer for Cora when she found out the town wasn't named after her anymore. We're gonna finish the day here in Bona, B-O-N-A, and there's a few things here to see. This is another one of those towns that has been gone for a while, but this one still has quite a few people living here, a lot of houses. There's a church, cemetery, a couple of older buildings. Like I said, this is the end of part one. Hopefully you enjoyed strolling around the eastern half of Dade County. It was, I don't know, kind of full of more than I thought there would be. A lot of different things like mills and very scenic areas and a lot of water, and found a lot of historic old structures too. So come back next week for part two. Things getting faster. One lane road. Gotta get over. Sure, those guys are just hanging out the back. Dilday Mill. That's Dilday Mill. Say that fast 5 times. Dilday Mill. Dilday Mill. Dilday da da da.